He had lived on the property for several years, long enough for the routines of daily life to feel settled and predictable. Every morning followed the same rhythm. He stepped outside with his coffee, checked the fence line, and walked the edge of his land the way his father once taught him. It was not because he was suspicious or fearful, but because he respected the land he paid for. To him, ownership meant responsibility. He kept the grass trimmed, the boundary markers visible, and the driveway clear. Nothing about that morning felt unusual at first. The sun was still low, and the air carried that calm silence that only exists before the rest of the neighborhood wakes up. Birds moved between trees, and a light breeze brushed past the fence that had stood there long before most of the houses nearby were built. He leaned against the porch rail, thinking about work and bills, when a dark SUV slowed near the edge of his driveway. It stopped abruptly, tires crunching on gravel. Two people stepped out, both holding clipboards. Their posture was stiff, official, and practiced. He could tell right away they were not neighbors coming over to chat. One of them glanced around, eyes moving from the fence to the ground, as if searching for something wrong. The other cleared their throat and walked forward. They told him they were from the Homeowners Association. The tone was firm, almost rehearsed, like a speech repeated many times before. Without greeting him properly, they said he was trespassing on HOA-controlled land. According to them, part of his fence and driveway crossed into common property. The words came fast and confident, leaving no space for conversation. For a moment, he thought it had to be a mistake. He laughed lightly, not out of disrespect, but disbelief. He explained that the land had been surveyed when he bought it. He had paperwork. Everything was legal. The fence had not moved an inch since he first stepped onto the property years ago. But his explanation did not slow them down. They pointed at the ground, at the fence posts, at a corner near the trees. One of them wrote something down while the others spoke about violations, warnings, and possible fines. The language was heavy and intimidating, full of rules and authority. They spoke as if the matter was already settled, as if his words carried no weight. He felt a knot form in his stomach. Not fear, but frustration. It is a strange feeling to be told you do not belong on land you wake up on every day. He stayed calm, though. Years of handling difficult people had taught him that raising his voice never solved anything. He asked for clarification. He asked which map they were using. He asked how long this had been an issue. Their answers were vague. They said complaints had been made. They said boundaries had been reviewed. They said the HOA had authority. None of it felt clear or fair. When he asked to see proof, they said notices would be sent. That was when he noticed a neighbor standing across the street, pretending to water plants but clearly watching. The HOA representatives left a paper on his porch. It was a warning notice stating that he was trespassing and had a limited time to correct the issue. The words looked harsh against the simple wood of the porch. When the SUV drove away, the quiet of the morning returned. But it no longer felt peaceful. He stood there for a long time, reading the notice again and again. Trespassing. The word felt heavy. He had worked his entire life to avoid trouble, to stay within the rules. Now he was being labeled as someone who ignored them. The thought bothered him more than the threat of fines. Later that day, as he went about his normal routine, he noticed more eyes on him. A few neighbors nodded politely, but others whispered. One even asked casually if everything was okay with the HOA. He replied with a short answer, unwilling to explain something he did not fully understand himself. That evening, another letter arrived by email. It repeated the same claims but added a deadline. If the issue was not resolved, enforcement actions would follow. The message was cold and formal, with no room for discussion. It felt less like a community organization and more like a legal threat. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen. The house around him felt smaller than usual. Memories of moving in flooded back. He remembered signing papers, walking the land with a surveyor, and being told exactly where the boundaries were. He remembered placing the fence with care, making sure it matched the markers. Something was not right. Instead of reacting immediately, he chose to slow down. He turned off the computer and went to the garage. In a metal cabinet, buried beneath tools and old receipts, were folders he had not opened in years. He pulled them out one by one, spreading them across the workbench. There were contracts, inspection reports, and finally the deed. The paper was slightly worn at the edges, but the print was clear. The property description listed measurements, boundary lines, and reference points. He read it carefully, tracing each line with his finger. The numbers matched his memory. Nothing had changed. The land was his. Still, doubt crept in. Maybe the HOA had newer maps. Maybe something had been reclassified. He knew enough to understand that paperwork could be twisted if someone tried hard enough. But he also knew the value of staying grounded in facts. The next morning, another notice was taped near the fence, visible from the street. This one mentioned possible penalties and legal review. It felt public, almost intentional. Anyone walking by could see it. He took it down quietly, folding it and placing it with the others. The situation began to weigh on him. Sleep came later each night. His mind replayed the conversation again and again. He thought about how easily authority could be misused, how quickly a person could be made to feel small. But he also thought about how calm he had remained. And that gave him strength. He decided not to argue in the street or confront anyone emotionally. Instead, he made a simple plan. First, gather every document. Second, understand exactly what the HOA was claiming. Third, respond only with proof. As days passed, the pressure increased. More emails arrived. The tone grew sharper. Words like compliance and enforcement appeared more often. Still, no one from the HOA answered his specific questions. They spoke at him, not with him. Neighbors began to talk openly now. Some believed the HOA without question. Others were unsure. A few quietly told him they hoped he would stand his ground. Their support mattered, but he knew this was something he had to face on his own. One afternoon, he walked the property again, this time with a measuring tape and a notebook. He checked distances, corners, and markers. Everything aligned with the deed. Each step reassured him. Standing near the fence, he felt a mix of anger and resolve. Not explosive anger, but the steady kind that fuels determination. He realized this was not just about land. It was about dignity, fairness, and the right to exist without being bullied by the end of the week. He had organized all his documents into a single folder: deed, survey, photos, notes. He looked at it and felt prepared for the first time. Since the accusation began, the HOA may have believed they held all the power, but they had underestimated one thing. He was patient. He was informed, and he was ready to prove that the ground beneath his feet had always been his. That was only the beginning. The days after the initial confrontation became heavier. Each morning he woke to the sense of being watched, a quiet tension that had settled over the neighborhood. The once simple act of stepping outside felt charged, as if the world had shifted slightly, and he had to be cautious with every movement. The HOA's notices were piling up. Their language became sterner, mentioning fines, legal action, and the need to correct the alleged trespassing immediately. It was not just a warning anymore. It felt like a campaign to force him into submission. At first, he tried to ignore it, telling himself that the documents in his possession would speak for themselves. But the constant reminders made it harder to focus. The driveway he had walked on every morning now felt like a contested zone. He noticed small changes in the neighborhood, too. People who once smiled now exchanged quick glances or avoided eye contact. There were whispers as he passed by. The tension was subtle, but real. It was not malicious from everyone, just an effect of uncertainty. People naturally feared conflict. One morning, the HOA sent another representative. It's a younger man this time, carrying a tablet instead of clipboards. He approached cautiously, but the tone was the same, firm, direct, and uncompromising. He pointed at the fence, the driveway, and the corner of the yard where a small tree had grown. According to the HOA, all these were encroachments, violations, and reasons for immediate action. There was no room for discussion, just instructions on what needed to be removed, corrected, or relocated. Each word felt like a weight pressing down. He responded politely, keeping his voice calm. He explained that everything had been properly surveyed and fenced according to the deed. He offered to show documentation if needed. The young representative glanced at him briefly, then tapped on the tablet, murmuring something about previous complaints and the HOA rules. When he asked for a copy of the official maps they were using, the representative said it would be mailed, but he had to act immediately regardless. It was confusing, frustrating, and intimidating. After the meeting, he walked around his property, feeling the edges of the land he knew was his. The sun was warmer that day, but it did little to ease the tightness in his chest. He reflected on how authority could feel so absolute when backed by organization, even when it was clearly mistaken. It was a strange combination of fear and outrage. He felt both at once. Back inside, he opened the folder with his documents again. Survey maps, inspection notes, and property deeds lay neatly on the table. He traced lines with his fingers, comparing them mentally to what the HOA was claiming. Every measurement matched. Nothing had shifted. Every corner, every boundary was as it had always been. He felt a small sense of relief, but it was tempered by the realization that proving this to others would be a different challenge. The neighborhood atmosphere began to shift too. More neighbors whispered about him and the HOA. Some expressed sympathy quietly. Others avoided him completely. A few offered advice, mostly vague, about mediation or hiring lawyers. He listened, but remained silent. He wanted to respond only when he had undeniable proof. Words alone would not be enough. Evidence was the only thing that could stop the escalating tension. Then came the letters. They were more formal, written in legal tones, each one repeating accusations and listing potential penalties. Each letter was stapled to the previous one, creating a growing stack of warnings. They mentioned deadlines, compliance requirements, and possible actions like removing structures, paying fines, and attending hearings. The language was designed to create urgency and discomfort. Each time he read one, he felt the pressure, but he refused to panic. Panic would only cloud judgment. At night, sleep became irregular. Thoughts raced between the daily responsibilities of life and the ongoing situation. He worried about the growing whispers, the tension in the community, and the potential escalation. Sometimes he wondered how icy authority could manipulate perception. One day they called it a trespass. The next day, it was non-compliance. Words had power, and he had to be careful not to react emotionally. He started documenting everything meticulously. Every encounter with the HOA, every letter, every conversation with neighbors. He took photos of the boundaries, measured distances, and kept a notebook detailing the dates, times, and events. It was a slow process, but it gave him a sense of control. Control over facts, over truth, over how he would eventually present his case. One afternoon, as he was measuring the fence line, a neighbor approached, clearly curious but hesitant. The neighbor asked quietly if he really was trespassing. He smiled faintly, choosing honesty without conflict. He explained that he believed the land was his according to the deed, and that he had all the paperwork to prove it. The neighbor nodded, relieved to hear a reasonable explanation, and walked away. It was a small victory, a reminder that clarity and patience could influence perception. Even amidst fear and rumors, the pressure from the HOA did not diminish. Notices continued to arrive, some more aggressive than others. They suggested meetings, inspections, and compliance reviews. Each note emphasized urgency and potential penalties. Despite the stress, he stayed grounded, knowing that emotional reactions would play into their hands. He was determined to respond with facts, not anger, to maintain his peace. He began taking walks around the neighborhood, observing how others interacted. He noticed the subtle ways fear influenced behavior, how quickly opinions could form based on authority rather than truth. These walks were quiet therapy, a way to regain perspective. He would return home, sit at the kitchen table, and review his folder once more, strengthening the mental map of his property and the proof of ownership. He also reached out to a few contacts in local property law, not for immediate legal action, but to understand his position better. Conversations were calm, factual, and enlightening. He learned that documentation was the strongest defense, that HOA rules could be contested if they contradicted actual deeds, and that patience often worked in favor of homeowners. These insights reinforced his plan: gather proof, remain calm, and respond strategically. In the evenings, he wrote notes to himself, recording the timeline of events. Each entry helped him organize thoughts, identify weak spots, and ensure nothing was overlooked. He felt the situation shifting from chaotic to manageable. It was still stressful, but he had begun reclaiming mental space from the pressure the HOA had created. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable. A few neighbors now openly asked questions. One admitted privately that they had doubted him at first, but were beginning to see that the HOA might have overstepped. Another neighbor hinted that some residents were frustrated with the HOA's methods even if they remained silent publicly. Slowly, the perception of truth was changing. Through all this, he never lost sight of what mattered: the land he had bought, the integrity of his position, and the calm reasoning he maintained throughout. He realized that the HOA's intimidation tactics were designed to elicit fear, to force compliance without scrutiny. By staying methodical, calm, and focused on facts, he neutralized much of their psychological pressure. By the end of the second week, he had created a comprehensive record of the situation. Photos, measurements, letters, notes, and contacts all organized. He felt more empowered. The initial shock and stress had transformed into preparation and quiet determination. While the HOA had attempted to dominate, he had begun to reclaim control, step by step. The first part of the conflict had tested his patience and composure. Now, the focus shifted toward evidence, confrontation with proof. In the preparation for the inevitable discussion with the HOA, he knew the next phase would require careful strategy, patience, and unwavering confidence in his rights. He was ready. He had spent days reviewing the documents, measuring the property, and organizing every piece of evidence he had. The stack of papers on his desk grew taller, but with each sheet, his confidence also grew. The deed, the surveys, the photographs, and his detailed notes all pointed to the same truth. The land he had purchased legally belonged to him. Still, the HOA's accusations hung in the air like a shadow. He knew that understanding the truth was only half the battle. The other half would be convincing others, particularly the HOA board. One afternoon, while looking through an old folder, he found a set of maps from when the neighborhood was first developed. The lines were faint but clear, showing every lot and common area. Comparing these maps with his survey and deed, he noticed something important. The area the HOA claimed was theirs had always been listed as part of his property. The realization brought a sense of relief, but he also felt a growing determination. He could no longer let the situation slide. It was time to gather everything into a single, undeniable case. He spent the next few days meticulously organizing his materials. Each document had a purpose. The deed was at the center, surrounded by surveys, old maps, and photos of the property over the years. He even included notes from conversations with neighbors who had lived there for decades. These witnesses could support his claims if needed. The stack of evidence was thorough, methodical, and most importantly, irrefutable. Meanwhile, HOA continued sending notices, each one more urgent than the last. They threatened fines, legal action, and even the removal of structures. Each notice was like a small weight pressing on him, but he refused to be intimidated. He reminded himself that facts were stronger than threats. Every time he read their letters, he marked the points he could counter with his documentation. He also began to pay closer attention to the community. Some neighbors were curious, some skeptical, and others openly supportive. A few approached quietly, offering advice and encouragement. They seemed relieved that someone was standing up to the HOA, but they also warned him to proceed carefully. He listened politely, taking mental notes, but he relied primarily on his own research and understanding. He needed certainty before taking the next step. During this time, he reached out to a local property surveyor for a professional opinion. The surveyor visited the property, measured the boundaries, and compared them to the official records. After hours of careful inspection, The surveyor confirmed what he already knew. The land in dispute belonged entirely to him. There was no overlap with the HOA's property. The confirmation was crucial. It meant that even if the HOA argued, there was professional validation of his claims. With the evidence in hand and professional support, he began drafting a formal response to the HOA. The goal was clear: present the facts calmly and thoroughly, leaving no room for misinterpretation. He wrote carefully, detailing each piece of evidence, referencing dates, measurements, and historical records. The tone was firm but respectful, avoiding emotional language. He knew that logic and clarity would be far more effective than anger or frustration as he prepared the documents. He also anticipated possible counterarguments from the HOA. They might claim outdated maps, clerical errors, or mistaken boundaries. He accounted for each potential objection, preparing evidence and explanations to address them. The process was time-consuming, but he understood that thoroughness would be key to resolving the conflict once and for all. The day he decided to submit his evidence, he felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. Walking to the HOA office, he carried the folder carefully, aware that the confrontation was inevitable. The building looked the same as it had every time he passed by, but today it seemed more intimidating. He reminded himself of the preparation and proof he had gathered. No amount of posturing or threats could change the facts. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. HOA staff greeted him politely, but with an air of authority. They seemed aware that he had organized his evidence, though they tried not to show it. He requested a meeting with the board members responsible for the trespassing claims. After a short wait, he was invited into a conference room. The room felt formal, almost sterile, with a long table and chairs on either side. The board members sat opposite him, reviewing papers and tablets, looking authoritative. He began by presenting the deed, explaining the boundaries, and showing the surveys and historical maps. Each document was laid out clearly, with photos and notes to support the claims. He spoke slowly, calmly, ensuring each point was understood. There was no aggression, no accusation, just facts presented logically and systematically. As he spoke, he noticed subtle shifts in the room. Board members glanced at each other, some frowning, others avoiding eye contact. One member questioned a measurement, and he showed the professional surveyor's report. Another asked about the historical maps, and he explained how the property had been documented from the development phase. Each question he answered with patience and evidence, leaving little room for doubt. The meeting lasted longer than he expected. They reviewed each document, compared numbers, and discussed quietly among themselves. At one point, a board member leaned back and sighed, clearly realizing the weight of the evidence. The confidence in their initial accusations seemed to fade as the facts became undeniable. What had started as a simple claim of trespassing had turned into a situation where the HOA's authority was being challenged by clear, documented proof. He remained calm throughout, knowing that any emotional reaction could undermine his position. His goal was not to humiliate or embarrass anyone, but to clarify the truth and protect his rights. He answered questions carefully, cited specific measurements, and referenced the surveyor's professional opinion. Slowly, the mood shifted from confrontation to acknowledgement. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the HOA's claims had no basis. The board members admitted that the boundaries were indeed part of his property. There were discussions about updating their records, issuing formal corrections, and notifying any parties involved that the trespassing claims were invalid. The weight of intimidation that had hung over him for weeks began to lift, leaving the office. He felt a sense of relief, but also reflection. The process had been exhausting, not just physically, but emotionally. He realized how easily misunderstandings or misinterpretations could escalate into conflict, and how important it was to remain patient and methodical when defending oneself. He also recognized the importance of professional advice, its thorough documentation, and calm communication. Over the following days, he sent follow-up emails confirming the outcomes of the meeting. The HOA formally withdrew all trespassing claims, and the fines and warnings were nullified. Notices sent to neighbors were corrected, clarifying that the property boundaries were accurate and that he held rightful ownership. The community slowly began to acknowledge the resolution, and whispers of doubt regarding the HOA's initial claims began to fade. Neighbors approached him with words of support, some apologizing for doubting him, others simply expressing relief that the matter was settled. The experience had changed him, teaching lessons about patience, preparedness, and the power of truth. He had navigated a situation where authority was misused and had emerged not just victorious, but wiser. While the conflict was resolved, he remained vigilant. He understood that peace required ongoing attention to boundaries, documentation, and communication. The ordeal had reinforced his respect for facts, for careful observation, and for the quiet power of calm persistence. It had been a challenging journey, but it affirmed his ability to protect what was rightfully his without resorting to anger or confrontation. In the end, the deed, surveys, and historical records had spoken louder than accusations, threats, and assumptions. He had proven that truth, patience, and preparation could overcome even the most confident attempts to intimidate. The experience left him with not only the security of his property, but also a strengthened sense of resilience and understanding of the value of standing firm on principles. The resolution marked a turning point, a reminder that knowledge and composure were invaluable tools in facing any challenge. He arrived at the HOA office early, carrying the folder with all his evidence neatly organized. There was a quiet determination in his steps. He had spent countless hours preparing for this moment, knowing that presenting the facts clearly and calmly was crucial. The office looked ordinary, but today it felt different. Today, he had the proof that would challenge the authority that had pressured him for weeks. Inside, the receptionist greeted him politely, though her eyes hinted at curiosity. He explained that he had a meeting with the board regarding the property dispute. After a short wait, he was led into the conference room where the board members sat, already reviewing papers and talking quietly. The atmosphere was tense, a mix of authority and uncertainty. They seemed aware that he had come prepared. He set the folder on the table and opened it carefully. He began by presenting the original deed, tracing the boundaries and highlighting the legal description of the property. He spoke clearly and calmly, ensuring that each point was understood. The board members listened, but exchanged glances, perhaps realizing that this situation was more serious than they had initially believed. Next, he presented the surveyor's report, explaining the measurements and confirming that the property lines were accurate. Each document was methodically placed on the table, accompanied by photos of the property over the years, maps from the neighborhood's development, and notes from previous inspections. He wanted to leave no room for doubt. His goal was to show that the evidence was thorough, consistent, and professional. The board members began to ask questions, some of them tentative, others more direct. One member questioned a corner of the property that the HOA claimed was common land. He responded with the surveyor's measurements, the historical maps, and the photos showing the boundary markers. Another asked about the fence, suggesting it might have been moved. He calmly explained that the fence had remained in its original position, aligning with the deed and survey. Each answer was factual and supported by documentation. As the discussion continued, it became clear that the board members were struggling to defend their initial claims. Their questions became more careful, their tone less assertive. He noticed the subtle shifts in body language, the slight hesitations, the exchange of uneasy glances. The confidence they had shown when accusing him of trespassing was fading under the weight of evidence. He maintained his composure, speaking only when necessary, allowing the facts to guide the conversation. He refrained from expressing frustration or anger, even though the ordeal had been stressful and emotionally draining. He knew that remaining calm was essential to maintaining credibility and authority in the discussion. One board member finally asked if he had spoken to a professional surveyor. He presented the surveyor's report and explained the process, how the measurements had been taken, and the verification of property lines. The member nodded, seemingly acknowledging that the professional confirmation reinforced his claims. Another member questioned the historical maps, and he detailed how the maps traced the property from the neighborhood's development phase, showing no overlap with HOA land. Throughout the meeting, he observed the reactions of each board member. Some were silent, clearly processing the information. Others shifted uncomfortably, perhaps realizing that their previous actions had been based on incorrect assumptions. The tension in the room began to ease, replaced by a sense of acknowledgement that the situation needed to be corrected. After reviewing all the evidence, the board members began discussing quietly among themselves. They consulted the maps, compared numbers, and considered the surveyor's report. The discussion was subdued, no longer confident or authoritative. It was a recognition that the facts were undeniable and that the HOA's initial claims were unfounded. He remained patient, allowing them the space to process the information. He knew that pressuring or arguing would not help. His role was to present the evidence and clarify the truth. Slowly, the board acknowledged that the property boundaries were correct, that the land belonged to him, and that the accusations of trespassing were invalid. The meeting continued with discussions about corrective actions. The board members talked about updating records, notifying residents, and formally withdrawing the trespassing claims. They acknowledged that fines and warnings should be nullified. While they did not offer an apology outright, their tone suggested recognition of the mistake and an understanding of the unfair pressure they had placed on him. He left the meeting with a sense of relief and accomplishment. The immediate threat of fines and legal action was removed, and the HOA had formally recognized the validity of his property boundaries. The weeks of stress, tension, and uncertainty had culminated in a resolution supported by undeniable evidence. Back at home, he reviewed the folder one last time, reflecting on the process. The experience had been exhausting, but also enlightening. He had learned the importance of preparation, patience, and calm reasoning. He realized how easily authority could be misused and how important it was to rely on facts, documentation, and professional advice when facing such challenges. Neighbors, who had observed the situation, began approaching him with curiosity and support. Some admitted they had initially doubted him, influenced by the HOA's claims, but now expressed relief and admiration for the way he handled the conflict. Others sought advice, inspired by his methodical approach to resolving disputes. The situation that had once cast a shadow over his daily life now became a story of perseverance and validation. In the following days, he followed up with written confirmation to the HOA, ensuring that the resolution was documented formally. The HOA responded, acknowledging the withdrawal of the claims and confirming the correction of records. Notices to residents were updated, clarifying the accuracy of property boundaries and nullifying the previous accusations. He also reflected on the emotional journey. The pressure, intimidation, and uncertainty had tested his patience and composure. Yet, by remaining calm, organized, and focused on facts, he had navigated the conflict successfully. He recognized the value of evidence, professional guidance, and careful communication in resolving disputes and protecting one's rights. The experience left him with a deeper understanding of authority, responsibility, and the importance of standing firm in the face of unfounded claims. He had faced a situation that could have escalated into prolonged conflict or legal battles. Yet he resolved it with dignity and clarity. The knowledge that he had defended his property and rights without resorting to aggression or hostility was empowering. As he resumed his normal routines, he noticed the neighborhood felt lighter. The whispers of doubt and tension gradually faded. Neighbors greeted him with genuine smiles, some offering congratulations, others simply acknowledging the resolution. The house and property that had been the center of controversy now felt secure and respected. He continued to maintain the property carefully, ensuring that boundaries were clear and markers visible. The experience had reinforced the importance of vigilance, documentation, and clear communication. He also remained connected with a few neighbors, fostering a sense of community based on mutual respect and understanding. While the conflict with the HOA was resolved, he remained mindful of the lessons learned. Authority could be mistaken, rules could be misapplied, and perceptions could be influenced by pressure and intimidation. Yet facts, preparation, and calm determination had proven stronger than any claim or threat. He had learned to trust in evidence, to remain patient, and to approach challenges with clarity and composure. In the end, The resolution of the trespassing claims marked not just a victory for property rights, but a reaffirmation of patience, persistence, and the power of truth. The journey had been difficult, but it had strengthened his understanding of fairness, resilience, and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. He had proven that careful preparation, unwavering calm, and reliance on facts could overcome even the most confident assertions of authority. And he carried this lesson forward into the future. After weeks of uncertainty, stress, and careful preparation, he finally felt a sense of calm returning to his life. The HOA had formally acknowledged that their claims of trespassing were unfounded, and the boundaries of his property had been recognized officially. The relief was immense, but it was also quiet, a gentle weight lifting from his shoulders rather than a dramatic celebration. He knew that the real impact of this experience was deeper than just the correction of boundaries. It was a lesson in patience, preparation, standing firm for what is right. The days following the resolution were filled with small but meaningful actions. He began by double-checking the property markers, ensuring that every corner was clearly defined and visible. He trimmed overgrown grass near the edges, repositioned the fence where minor shifts had occurred over the years, and took new photographs for documentation. Even though he had won the dispute, he understood that maintaining clarity and visibility of property lines was a preventive measure, a way to ensure that future misunderstandings could be avoided. Neighbors, once wary and uncertain, began to approach him more openly. Some apologized for believing the HOA's initial claims, expressing relief that the matter had been settled fairly. Others offered support and congratulations, quietly acknowledging the strength and patience he had demonstrated. These interactions, though subtle, reinforced a sense of community and mutual respect. He realized that the way he handled the situation had influenced how others perceived him and the HOA. Calm, methodical actions had more power than confrontation or anger. The HOA, on their part, took steps to formalize the correction. They updated their records, withdrew all fines and warnings, and issued notices to residents clarifying the true boundaries of his property. While there was no full apology, the acknowledgement of error was clear. The letters and updated documents ensured that the situation was officially resolved, providing a layer of security that went beyond personal satisfaction. He carefully filed all correspondence, ensuring that the resolution was documented for any future reference. As the tension faded, he found himself reflecting on the emotional journey. The first confrontation had brought confusion and a sense of injustice. The days of notices, inspections, and veiled threats created a constant background stress, affecting even routine activities. Yet, through all of this, he maintained a calm focus, carefully documenting everything and verifying facts. The discipline and patience he exercised became a form of empowerment, a way to transform a stressful situation into an opportunity to demonstrate resilience. One afternoon, he sat on the porch, looking at the property that had been at the center of the dispute. The fence stood firmly, the grass was trimmed, and the boundaries were clear. He thought about how easily misunderstanding could escalate, how authority could sometimes be assumed without proper verification. The experience had taught him to approach conflicts with a combination of respect, preparation, and factual evidence. Emotions, while natural, could cloud judgment and prolong challenges. He also considered the neighbors who had watched the events unfold. Some had acted cautiously, unsure of what was true. Others had doubted him completely, swayed by the HOA's confident assertions. But over time, as the facts became evident and the situation was resolved, perceptions began to shift. The quiet validation he felt was not just personal, it extended to the community, showing that truth and patience could overcome intimidation and misinformation. In the weeks that followed, he remained proactive in maintaining his property and his peace of mind. Regular walks along the boundary lines, periodic reviews of documentation, and careful attention to correspondence became part of his routine. These actions were not driven by fear, but by a desire to ensure clarity and prevent future disputes. The experience had instilled a sense of vigilance, not paranoia. A commitment to understanding and protecting his rights. He also took time to reflect on how the situation had been resolved. Legal action had been possible, but it had not been necessary. Instead, the combination of thorough documentation, professional verification, and calm communication had achieved the desired outcome. This approach reinforced the value of preparation and reasoning over confrontation. The HOA had attempted to assert authority through intimidation, but the careful, patient presentation of evidence had neutralized their power. The lessons extended beyond property boundaries. He understood that in life, misunderstandings, assumptions, and authority missteps could occur in many areas. How one responded to such challenges calmly, methodically, and with evidence could determine the outcome more effectively than anger or haste. Patience, persistence, and clarity were tools that could resolve conflict without escalating tension unnecessarily. Neighbors, who approached him with questions or curiosity, were met with calm explanations. He shared insights about the importance of documentation, the value of professional verification, and the need for clear communication. These interactions fostered a sense of community, showing that disputes could be resolved without hostility. He emphasized that understanding facts and maintaining composure were more powerful than reacting emotionally. Lessons that applied not just to property disputes, but to many aspects of life. Over time, the HOA seemed to adjust to the correction. Their notices and communications became less frequent and less authoritative, reflecting an acknowledgement of the limits of their claims. While they remained part of the community structure, their influence over his property rights had been clarified and limited. The resolution marked a balance between authority and individual rights, a recognition that rules and enforcement must align with facts and fairness. The emotional impact of the experience gradually shifted from stress to reflection and empowerment. He appreciated the value of standing firm, not aggressively, but with evidence and composure. The ordeal had tested his patience and resilience, but it had also strengthened his confidence in his ability to navigate complex situations. He realized that fear and intimidation could be countered effectively with preparation and calm determination. As the months passed, the property became a place of pride rather than tension. He maintained the land carefully, ensuring visibility of boundaries, proper upkeep of the fence, and clear documentation. The process of resolving the dispute had instilled habits of attentiveness and diligence, habits that reinforced security and peace of mind. Community interactions also improved. Conversations with neighbors were more open, and there was a mutual understanding of respect for boundaries and rights. The experience had highlighted the importance of clear communication, observation, and integrity. People recognized that conflict could be resolved respectfully, with truth and preparation guiding the process. Reflecting on the entire journey, he understood that the resolution was not just about property lines or HOA rules. It was about the principles of fairness, patience, and evidence-based action. The calm, methodical approach had turned a potentially hostile confrontation into a learning experience that reinforced confidence, resilience, and understanding of human behavior. In the end, he felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The deeds, surveys, and professional reports had stood as the foundation of truth. The HOA's initial claims had been fully addressed, their threats nullified, and the property's boundaries clarified. More importantly, he had navigated the process with patience, composure, and clarity, setting an example for neighbors and demonstrating the power of reason over intimidation. Life returned to a quiet normalcy. But with deeper understanding, he remained vigilant, attentive, and prepared, not out of fear, but out of respect for clarity and truth. The journey had reinforced lessons that would guide future decisions, interactions, and challenges. Standing firm on facts, maintaining composure, and approaching disputes thoughtfully had proven far more effective than reacting impulsively. Ultimately, the resolution brought not just security of property, but personal growth and confidence. The weeks of challenge had forged a stronger sense of resilience, an understanding of authority, and an appreciation for preparation and patience. The ordeal was over, but its lessons endured, shaping his approach to life, conflict, and community interactions. He knew that in facing challenges, calm reasoning, thorough preparation, and unwavering adherence to truth would always be his strongest tools.